Vienna said. Love the robot voice that comes up there. Like Vienna said, I've been doing this presentation for a little bit. I've been volunteering with the Mountaineers for quite a while. And the impetus for this presentation came out of my experience, my early experience with the Mountaineers, my growing understanding that this is a volunteer-led organization and that a lot of our passionate volunteers don't necessarily come from an education background. Totally understandable, right? We come from all walks of life. But a desire to kind of up the level, up the abilities across our organization for better instructional capabilities, better planning for instructional events across all of the events that we do. And I joined the Basic Alpine Climbing Committee in 2017 and supported them in kind of in that role. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen actually, because this is a great transition to my title slide here. If it's been a bit since you've been in Zoom, a reminder that the share screen might zoom to grab your entire screen. If you don't like that, you can hit the escape button and that will drop that back down to that windowed view there. But we'll be bouncing between the share screen and the not shared screen quite a few times this evening. So you'll have some opportunities to practice kind of jumping in and out of that mode there. Let me see if I can get all the faces back here on my side. My new position with OSPI has me using Teams now. I was just talking with a couple of participants. I'm getting a little rusty in Zoom. So there we go. My dual monitor set up now. I've got my presentation going and I can see all of you. Outstanding. So I titled this From Lectures to Evenings of Learning. And the idea behind that is that I came on as the lectures chair in the Basic Alpine Climbing Committee in the Tacoma branch in 2017. And right away, just wanted to change that from lectures to classroom sessions, for example, to kind of start to shift the idea about what it means to learn in that mountaineer's classroom. When I took my basic alpine climbing class in 2016, my first couple of classroom experiences were sitting for 3 hours or so while somebody talked at us about climbing mountains. And I thought, what is going on here? Is this how we learn how to climb mountains? Is by being talked at? And obviously, no, that's not how any of us learn how to do the various disciplines that we're engaged with the mountaineers. We learn by getting that opportunity to go out and to do it with our instructors and with those people more experienced with us as we gradually acquire those skills and those capabilities. So I feel like my years serving on the Tacoma Basic Alpine Climbing Committee helped to shift the needle a little bit and move them more towards these evenings of learning as I have it set up here. My screen's still showing, right? I've got my title slide up here. The green bar disappeared, so that's why I wanted to check in there real quick. We
Yes,
still
it
have
is still
people. Thank
showing.
you. Appreciate that very much. We have people coming in. I'm going to make sure to click admit on them. The other piece I wanted to mention will probably come back up later. Oh, our time this evening. Vienna was so nice to give us 2 hours for this evening's presentation. The reason for that is I've been running this as an hour and a half and always coming up short at the end. And it felt kind of like this couldn't catch our breath sort of pace. And I think we can probably get away with a little bit less than that 2 hours tonight, but definitely 145 or so. And it's not just going to be me talking at you as per, the whole idea behind this, changing this from just a lecture to an evening of learning where we're working together towards a common goal here. So there'll be a lot of opportunity for you to start to practice the skills that we're introducing this evening. And hopefully the 2 hour block of time will give us plenty of time to, like I said, to practice those in our discrete chunks that I have planned out throughout the evening, and to put some of those skills to work in an upcoming learning activity that you have maybe coming up with your groups. So we are going to press ahead in the presentation here. And what we're going to do is a real quick icebreaker. Full disclosure, I'm the sort of person who groans when I hear icebreaker. So when I design these, I always try to make them low stakes, easy to accomplish without a lot of dancing around or embarrassing ourselves or anything like that. So I hope that these questions are pretty simple and straightforward as I put you into some breakout rooms to talk with each other and get to know each other a little bit. Wherever I have this little teacher icon pop up, that's sort of a research-based best practice that I like to introduce because it's something that you might think about using. And I like to demonstrate those best practices through, using them myself in my presentation. So an icebreaker isn't just something that a facilitator throws in to kill 10 minutes at the start of a presentation. It's a really good opportunity to get our brains warmed up and to give you a little, or get you rather, a little more comfortable talking with the people that you will be participating with this evening. So I'm going to have you in these breakout rooms a couple of times, and you'll be sort of supporting each other as we move through a few of these activities. So this will be an opportunity to kind of get to know some of those people that you're going to work with. And I always think it's really interesting to kind of talk to people, get to know their name, of course, what Mountaineers activities they're involved in, because these sessions draw people from all sorts of activities across the Mountaineers. And then a little bit about what you hope to get out of this session. So what I'll do is create some breakout rooms. I'll put that prompt in the chat so that it doesn't disappear for you. And then I will send you into those breakout rooms. If it's been a while since you've used Zoom, I've got it set up, I think, to automatically bring you into the breakout rooms when I create them. There should be about 3 to 4 people per room. And then at the end of, what are we doing for this? 5 minutes, there'll be a little thing that pops up and gives you 10 seconds, at which point it'll pull you back into this main room automatically. So no worries there. If you haven't used Zoom very much, or if you're feeling a little rusty, it's a mostly automated process. What questions do you have about the next 5 minutes here? All right, in that case, I am going to go ahead and try to do this as quickly as possible. We're not going to include our co-hosts. We're going to recreate them. All right. So the idea, again, behind these is that these will be people you're working with throughout the evening here. Let me go ahead and grab the prompt here and add that to the chat. Should have had that lined up and ready to go, but it's not too far away. So that will stay for you when you go into the breakout room. And here we go. Open all rooms. You should get a little message popping up letting you know you're getting pulled into a room. Outstanding. Looks like that's the case here. And hopefully that transition isn't too jarring. I know it gives you the 10-second countdown timer, but sometimes it's hard to see, or it cuts somebody off in the middle of a sentence. I hate that. If we had more hours this evening, I would love to have everybody introduce themselves to, and share a little bit about that with the whole group. Unfortunately, we have quite an agenda for us, so we won't be able to quite get to that. But I will lead by example and talk about these prompts for myself. My name is Ben Brown. As you know, Vienna gave a little bit of my background. I've been in education for quite a while, currently supporting child nutrition services with the OSPI, the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, which is like the Washington Department of Education. And we support K-12 and some adult care homes and so on, but I'm the professional learning specialist with child nutrition services. So I help them to design good training opportunities for participants around the state, and it's a whole lot of fun. The Mountaineers activity I am most involved in is climbing. Started with the basic alpine climbing group, moved on to intermediate. I'm a forever intermediate student. I'll never graduate from intermediate, and that is just fine. I love rock climbing in particular. I will suffer through glacier climbing as long as I can get it done in a day, because I'm not the biggest fan of camping on snow, although I will do it if required to. But mostly day trips, rock climbing, alpine rock. Washington Pass is one of my favorite places in the state. And of course, some crag climbing as well. And what I hope to get out of this session, I'm actually going to introduce on the very next slide here. So there's that little teacher icon again, because research does show that students learn better when they know what they're learning. So simply making your learning objectives clear for students can help them learn your material better. Rather than obfuscating them, not telling them anything about those learning objectives, setting them clearly out at the start of your session, revisiting them even a few times during the session, and then taking a look at them at the very end can be a really powerful way to kind of keep your participants in that mode of, okay, here's what we're working on, here's what I'm learning. It can help it stick. So for you, my goals today, by the end of this session, it's my hope that you will be able to describe some concrete strategies for planning, implementing, and evaluating your learners, that you'll be able to identify potential applications of the things that we're learning to your own volunteering and instructing activities, and that you'll be able to even begin to apply some of these strategies during your work with partners in small groups this evening. So we won't just keep it at the theoretical level. I'm going to give you some opportunities to actually start putting this into practice this evening with either the curriculum that you brought, like that email from Vienna mentioned with the description of the session this evening, or using one of the examples that I will link you to in a little bit here. So before we move forward, I've put all these pictures in here because I love them. Any ideas about where that picture was taken?
Red Rocks.
Yeah, that lovely patina. That is Red Rocks, Nevada. I think that's the start of olive oil, if I remember correctly. I might be misremembering that one, but absolutely gorgeous area if you're into climbing, rock climbing. There are routes of all grades, a lot of trad stuff, a little bit of sport out there, but it's such a gorgeous area. John Dewey was an educational philosopher and a big name in the field of education in the 20th century. And we continue to learn about a lot of things that he kind of based his research and his life on. And this picture of Charles practicing tying into a rope up at Paradise during one of our field trips, just paired with that quote so well for me. So when we think about the work that we do in the Mountaineers and the work that we do with our students in the Mountaineers, we're not just again, not just talking about at this theoretical level, we are preparing them to go out and do the things that we're talking about and that we're practicing. And that to me is such a special way to work with students. That's different than a lot of traditional kind of classroom settings. So I really like that short quote from John doing that. The first section, we're going to look at planning. And I have a little note on here, thanks to Michelle Harper and Joe Harper Kowalczyk. Initially, this presentation was put together for the Mountaineers Leadership Conference in Seattle in 2018, 2019. And I took a portion of it. Joe and Michelle took a portion of it, and Nellie took a portion of it. So the three portions kind of came together to make this presentation. So I wanted to give due credit to Michelle and Joe, who put together the foundations that became this planning section. A turn-in talk is an activity I use in the classroom and now with adult learners very frequently. And it gives you an opportunity to activate prior knowledge, to make connections between experiences you already have and the content that we're going to be working on, right? So this is great in the classroom setting because it gives the facilitator an opportunity to give participants the chance to talk with the person sitting next to them a little bit. Obviously on Zoom, that looks a little different. And we could kind of bounce in and out of breakout rooms more here, but in the interests of time, I'm going to kind of skip over the important turning and talking to your elbow partner portion of it and probably just ask for hands or an unmuted mic and a contribution on this one, which is kind of defeating the purpose of the turn and talk. It's a low stakes way for participants to think about it without having to share in front of the group immediately. But so just take away that idea that can be a really powerful, quick, short way to get participants thinking for a second. What kind of instructor do you want to be? And or when you think of an instructor that you found effective in the past, what do you remember about that instructor and how they taught and the lessons that they worked on with you? I'll give you a second to think, sit with that and think about it. And I'd love to hear some responses. Would anyone like to share about what kind of instructor they'd like to be? Even if you haven't started instructing a lot with the Mountaineers, maybe it's an aspiration. Maybe you're really excited to teach new students the things that your mentors have been working on with you. And you're thinking like, here's what I want to do. And here's how I want to be for them.
Yeah, this
In the
is
chat.
Ed.
Hey, Ed, thank you.
I guess I try to uh, look at it from like a coach style. So train, do type of thing.
That's great. Yeah, you hear a lot of talk about The going a little birdwalk here. The sage on the stage style of instruction is kind of that lecture style. The guide on the side is what has been counseled for a number of years now. And a lot of people will say, well, what if we kind of like meet in the middle there and we're the coach in the middle, because that sort of combines both of these modes of interacting with your learners, right? You've got kind of the didactic where you're delivering them content, and then of course you've got a lot of that um, what you call it teach, learn, do, or train, do, working with them to get involved with this activity. So yeah, I think that coach style of instructing is a really good point there.
I'd like
I see
to
some,
just jump in and say the kind of instructor that I've always aspired to be is somebody who's memorable through enthusiasm, energy, and relevant stories that make connection to why we are learning what we're learning. And so that it doesn't feel like it's busy learning, but it's absolutely connected to staying safe outdoors, whatever it is. And so the most memorable instructors that I've had, I still remember them very, very clearly, in the same way that if you ask anybody who was your most memorable teacher at school, they've got somebody who they remember. And I
yeah,
aspire to be that person.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Dean. I appreciate you sharing. And if anybody else, if you don't feel comfortable sharing with on microphone, you're welcome to enter this in the chat as well. Sometimes that can be an easier way to share. No problem there. Thank you, Ed and Nina. I appreciate you sharing there. There are all sorts of different instructors, of course, a lot of different instructing styles. Hopefully we can all think of someone, whether it's from our school days, our school experiences, or in the Mountaineers, who are like, I really like that style. I want to instruct like that person is instructing because it's so effective, it's so memorable, it's so powerful. One thing that effective instructors use is a lesson plan. A lot of the instruction is purposeful, right? There's the reason for each piece of that instruction. And this is kind of a big, scary document, a big, scary picture to show here. So we're not going to dive too deeply into this, but I want to show it just to kind of make the point that there are kind of specific components to it, each of which is important. The top of the lesson plan starts with the learning goals. That's kind of the most important piece of instruction here. It moves on to an introduction of the materials and kind of almost scripts out the whole interaction with learners. And this is what, incidentally, K-12 instructors do early on in their careers. They'll almost script out the entire lesson using a lesson plan like this. From the introduction, you move into the guided practice, which is sort of the teaching itself. We're always looking for less of the sit and get, right? And more of the do together, going back to Ed's coaching style there. And then, of course, at the end, whether it's a classroom length lesson or if it's the end of a unit and so on, you want to make sure you're evaluating your students. How do you know they're learning what you intend for them to learn, right? And maybe you can see the connection back up with those learning goals there. Like I said, we're not going to dig too much into the lesson plan here, but we are going to focus on this really important piece of it, the learning goals, because that's kind of like, if you only take one thing away from the 2 hours that we have together this evening, starting with strong learning goals is the thing that I want you to take away. And incidentally, I should say too that the materials that we're covering this evening are the subjects in teacher school of three separate semesters, and we're cramming it all into 2 hours, right? So I don't expect you to leave masters of this content or even having retained all of it. But if a couple of key salient points stick out to you, and if one of those points is learning goals, then I will be very happy with that. And incidentally, I have some resources for you, which include a copyable form on Google of this lesson plan. So if you do like the idea of kind of being a little more formalized where when you're planning your instruction, I have some of those for you, and I'll link those in just a bit here. So when we think about the process of developing strong learning goals, we can follow sort of a formula that makes it easy for us, because this can be sort of an abstract task when we just see those words there, right? So unfortunately, it's not as easy as the ABCD, but we can talk about the CABD of developing strong learning goals. And to break each of those down, C is going to be our condition. In other words, as a result of attending or participating in blank. I've got my example. I forgot about that. As a result of attending field trip prep 1, What's the A? A is our audience, our students, right? That could be participants, could be as specific as our intermediate basic alpine climbing students, our crew members, the hikers on this trip, or whatever. Who are you presenting this learning opportunity for? In the case of our example, we're talking about our basic alpine climbing students here. The B is going to be our behavior. They will be able to, and this is a classic piece in, again, in K-12 instruction, the SWABOT, students will be able to. What are they going to be able to do at the end of this instruction? It should be observable and it should be measurable. For this one, people love to jump right to, they will understand. But if you start to reflect on that, you can't really observe understanding, right? There are ways that students can demonstrate their understanding, but the concept of understanding itself is something that's locked away until we get at it via these other routes. So in the case of my example here, I want those basic alpine climbing students to list and describe the 10 essentials. So that's how we're going to get at that understanding in this case. We're going to ask them to list and describe this 10 essentials. Degree is one that we can kind of take or leave on the CABD here. In some cases, like in rock climbing or glacier travel, for example, the degree or the ability to which they can perform it may be with severe consequences to life and limb, right? If it's something that the degree is, if they can't do it successfully every single time someone's going to die, then we might want to include the degree. But if the degree is not that important, like if they aren't able to list all the 10 essentials right there without forgetting any of them, maybe it's something we could leave off of our learning objective. So, or our learning goal rather. That said, part of my example includes the degree of without forgetting any of them. So presumably this is later in their basic alpine climbing course there. So a really strong learning objectives, you're tying together each of these pieces, and it's a sentence that's pretty reasonable, right? As a result of attending this field trip prep, my basic alpine climbing students that I'm working with will be able to list and describe the 10 essentials. How many of the 10 essentials will they be able to list and describe? All 10 of them, right? They're not allowed to forget any of them. If they don't do this successfully, we send them in a remedial track or whatever. If they do it successfully, great. We get to move on and say that we've taught it well. They've understood it. So another scary picture. Don't get too hung up on this. You don't need to read all the pieces of this. You don't need to remember all of this. This is just a really great example of verbs that we can use that are so much better and give us so much more flexibility in developing our learning goals than just understand, right? And you'll see that from the bottom here up to the top, the type of learning, the way that they're demonstrating that understanding gets more sophisticated. So on the bottom here, it's kind of this recall or remembering. As it moves up, an explanation of those ideas or concepts, using this information in a novel way, distinguishing, so getting more sophisticated with their new knowledge here, all the way up to creating a new product or point of view. Bottom level doesn't necessarily mean bad. A lot of us, especially pursuing a new activity, if we've never kayaked before, we need to be able to recall or remember that this part of the kayak is called such and such, or this part of the kayak is called something else, right? So that's a really important foundation on which to build those more sophisticated skills as we move through our experience, right? So thinking a little bit about the verbs on the right-hand side here, hopefully those are big enough to see there. Maybe skip. Well, no, I'll pitch that one to you too. As you think about this, why is it important to be as specific as we want to get at here when developing a good learning goal? And which of these verbs, as you look over the table there, which of them do we often ask our students to do? So think about those for a minute. Any thoughts on either of those questions? The second question might be a little easier. As you look through that table there, I bet some of those are familiar.
Well, the obvious one is to demonstrate. We're asking students to demonstrate things.
Absolutely. That's a great example. And that's kind of on that third level there. Once we've built up their foundational skills and aptitudes, their knowledge, right? Here's how we tie this knot. Here's where we use this knot. Now on the wall, show me using that knot, right? Demonstrate that skill for me. What else?
Can you apply it at appropriate times, at appropriate levels for whatever it is that you're attempting? And then in applying it, you're showing understanding and remembering.
I like that. Yeah, great example. And the application can be that verb itself can be more or less specific as we ask them to apply different skills, right? Say we're coming up to I keep going with the climbing examples because that's kind of my main discipline, but we're coming up to a slope with a certain degree to it that's covered in snow. There's a specific set of skills we're going to ask them to apply there in evaluating avalanche terrain, right? Whereas if we're walking on a relatively flat forest path, with trees on either side, it's a different set of skills that they might be applying at that moment. So, Patrick, did I see you on mute?
Yeah, I was just saying the verbs can inform the teaching style or your lessons plan, basically.
That is an awesome point. Yeah, and that's to our first question there. One of the reasons it's important to be specific with our verbs is because choosing the right verb really informs how we're going to teach and what we're going to teach, right? If we need them to just list something, that instruction is going to look a whole lot different than if they need to justify a position, right? If they need to argue in favor of this, or if they need to evaluate a complex set of variables in the terrain, for example. So yeah, absolutely. The right setting that learning goal using the appropriate verb for the situation, for the unit of instruction we're going into with our students is really important. Excellent. Any other comments on that? So, given the pieces of a good learning goal and the knowledge that it's important to be specific when we're picking the verbs that we want to apply to our students, what I would like to ask you to do is to take a few minutes to work either with the materials you brought or the examples provided, and I'll look at that in just a second. I'll show you how to get to those. And you'll develop 1 to 3, and probably more like 1, learning goals for that piece of instruction. We're going to keep it to behaviors that can be observed and measured, not just understand, but list or identify or describe and so on, demonstrate. And you're going to remember those conditions: who, what, and how well, right? So I've got a kind of a sheet for you here. Whoops, I apologize. It's been a bit rusty on Zoom. There we go. I am going to give you a link to this sheet here, and the lesson plan template, as promised, is up there. But the curriculum here is a list of things that I pulled from the Mountaineers website for a bunch of different courses, right? So for the Sea Kayaking Roll class, here's the kind of synopsis there. For the Leave No Trace trainer course, here's the synopsis of that course, and so on, right? So if you didn't bring any of your own curriculum this evening, you can kind of look through that list, pick a content area that's interesting to you, the course description there, and then kind of think about what learning goal would make sense for the stated objectives there, right? The synopsis of that activity there. Also on this, I've got the prompt, because when you go into your breakout rooms, you won't be able to see my shared screen anymore. So you've got that prompt there. And then, of course, the Bloom's taxonomy slide, organized a little differently from bottom to top. And I've even got this little cheat sentence here for you, the CABD. As a result of this learning opportunity, students in whatever course, which students will be able to do what you want them to be able to do to a standard of whatever, right? And remember, if you don't need that degree in there, or if you're having trouble kind of figuring out what the degree should be, you can leave that one off. That's not the most critical piece of the learning goal there. So let me get the link to the shared document in the chat. There we go. That should open for everybody. I've been through this enough times that I've got the sharing settings, the permissions pretty well ironed out. And before I send you back into those breakout rooms, just a note that you can feel free to kind of talk to your colleagues, ask them for support, ask them for clarifying questions and so on. Or if you just need to kind of turn off your camera and mute your mic and work on your own, that's totally fine too. But it's nice you've met these colleagues. You can maybe work with them, kind of ask them to help you think through some of these activities here. And we're going to take, let's go 12 minutes on this. This is something I'd like you to kind of think about, especially as you look over your curriculum, think about a good learning goal, what you might develop for that. So 12 minutes is the time we're going to work at here. What questions do you have about that process? Okay, in that case, we're going to open those rooms back up. Timer will start. You'll get the 10-second countdown at the end. I will be in the main room here if you want to hop back and ask any questions. Okay, welcome back. That was a big task. The process of identifying learning objectives takes a lot more than 12 minutes, especially if you're working with a particularly large course or one with multiple activities or competencies that you need your students to demonstrate in order to perform it safely. So no worries if you didn't quite hammer out exactly what you're hoping for there, but I would love to hear if any groups, either your own or you heard one from a colleague, I'd love to hear a few of what we came up with in that exercise.
I chose the verb interpret and put it into students will be able to interpret a topographic map, symbols, and the information so they can plan a trip for which they would like to go on.
Trying to capture that in the chat there. I think I got most of it. I love it. Thank you, Patrick, for sharing that one. Students will be able to interpret the topographic map, right? And the second part of that might even be a separate learning objective, right? Students will, I think we probably have a couple of things. Students will be able to do this, the map, the weather, read a weather report, find trip reports, some data about the place they want to go, and all this feeds into that. Students will be able to safely evaluate a lot of different factors to plan a trip that they want to take, right? But yeah, that's a great place to start. I love it. Are you doing one of the map reading, orienteering courses for the?
Yeah, I'll be teaching wilderness navigation for the Olympia branch this spring.
Outstanding, a really important one. I appreciate your work doing that. Wilderness navigation, that's the name of it. It wasn't coming to mind. Really important course though. Here, close my door here real quick. Who else came up with a learning objective?
I came up with a pretty broad one since we're doing a pretty broad curriculum, but students will be able to like have the skills to do a self-sufficient top roping and single pitch climbing skills to the degree of safely, but maybe not dialed and efficient every time. That's something that kind of only comes with practice.
I like it. Have the skills to, I'm going to go with demonstrate safe top rope and other skills. And that it gives me a great opportunity to share my screen again here because I had the chance to, I taught the Tacoma sport climbing course for a couple of years, and I had the opportunity to, this kind of small, to develop kind of this formalized template that the Seattle branch was asking for from each of the committees. And sport climbing, even in just the month that we worked on sport climbing, it's such a multivariate discipline. You've got so many different things going on that I used this kind of this sneaky technique when I was listing my learning goals on their template here. So this kind of what Blake was talking about just now reminded me, and this is linked incidentally in that resource I just gave you if you want to take a look at this. At course completion, graduates of the Mountaineers Tacoma Sport Climbing course, so I'm identifying my condition, course completion, my audience, the students of my sport climbing course, will be able to demonstrate the following skills and competencies, right? Demonstrate the following skills and competencies. So I did use a specific verb, and I talked about what they're going to apply it to, but then I went on to kind of bullet point list all these different things, right? And I might have done a sub verb kind of sneakily by turning it into another part of speech here, identification of safety concerns, right? Adherence to leave no trace principles and so on. But that gave me a really good way to kind of get at everything we wanted to accomplish in this course, up to including the development of and reflection on personal goals in rock climbing, right? Explanation of potential climbing related differences between different rock types and so on. And it was really fun to be able to sort of like kind of be freed from the format that I just talked to you about and still using very specific verbs, action, observable, measurable verbs here, kind of break away from that and to think about all the components that went into what would make a student successful upon completion of this course. So that's another potential approach too. I did use the word understanding in there. I'm now noticing, but it's a different kind of understanding, right? It comes along with the acknowledgement of the original people who occupied the places we are climbing. So that was kind of our that was another thing that I sent out some homework, and we took a look at some maps about who originally used the I-90 corridor and the crags that we were at, and so on. So I didn't. I could probably clean this up a little bit, but this was a great exercise, and that resource is available to you in those big three presentation documents in Ben's sport climbing course outline, and there's some other fun stuff in there to take a look at too. Let's get one more. I'm talking way too much here. I want someone else to talk. Let's hear another learning goal you came up with. I know we've got some good ones there. Maybe not yours, maybe one of your colleagues.
I can go next. So my the one that I used was as a result of repelling instructions. I expect the students in the basic Alpine course to be able to demonstrate proficiency in rappelling Alpine conditions and with the standard of 100% survival rate. And to be able to analyze their rappel setup, judge it, and defend their setup, explain why they think that they can survive that condition.
Cool. So I captured some additional notes there. I think that's a really good one. The 100% survival rate is, yes, that's something we want out of all of our courses. Safely is a little friendlier way to phrase that, maybe. But yeah, absolutely. No, I don't disagree with that. Yeah, and then getting onto the kind of sub-learning goals that fit under that one, because often these systems are complex and they need to be able to do a range of different things in order to be proficient with it, right? They need to analyze, they need to be able to take a look at what they've set up and how they've set up their rappel and to say, yes, this is safe. And before they start using it, to describe it to someone else, not just doing it because they saw someone else do it, but doing it because they understand it, right? Here's why I'm using my auto block. Here's why I've got it set up at a certain distance from it. Here's why, I fed the rope through both sides of the ATC and so on. Here's why I'm using a locking carabiner and all those pieces. They need to understand them, why they're safe, how they make it safe, and why that's going to result in that 100% survival rate. So yeah, Hadi, thank you very much. That's an excellent example of learning objective for basic alpine climbing. Love it. Cool. Thank you all so much for engaging in that activity with me. Hopefully that gave you, even if you didn't come away with that learning goal, hopefully it gave you a little bit of an opportunity to kind of practice those skills. Again, if there's only one thing that you leave this presentation with, it's that is so foundational to what we're working on with our students. Because if there's not a goal for our instruction with them, what are we all working towards, right? And if you haven't outlined those goals, if you haven't clarified them, how do you know what you're teaching your students? And how do you know that they've been successful or not, right? So yeah, such a foundational, fundamental piece of any learning opportunity. Let's play Guess That Climb again. Or, I don't know, region maybe. I already gave a little bit of a hint at the beginning.
Kangaroo Temple.
Say again?
Kangaroo Temple.
Oh, right next door. I love it. Thank you, Patrick. That's another one of my favorites. This is Liberty Bell. So just down the pass from Kangaroo Temple, North Cascades, Washington Pass area, some absolutely stunning climbs out there. I'm not even climbing very big stuff, just 5 fun. And I love it. I try to get back around Memorial Day. Has been about 50-50 for successful weather windows out there, but absolutely gorgeous time to climb it. Everything's covered in snow. The approach is covered in snow, so you're not walking through all that kitty litter, and you can get right up the gully to the base of the climb. So thank you, Spencer Kurt, for taking the photo of exhausted Ben up at the top. The next section of our 3 sections, we started with developing our learning goals. This next one is the implementation, right? The presenting, the facilitation, the teaching part of our learning opportunity. So what is presenting example exactly? This encompasses a number of different things. The method on the lesson plan might refer to as guided practice or the activity. And it gets at the fact that we can't just talk at people and have them retain the knowledge that we want to impart on them. We aren't sponges for information, right? We're more like sieves, where maybe some of that is sticking to the sides, but most of it is falling through the holes of that sieve or that colander. The presenting includes the goals, right? Like I mentioned at the start, research shows that students understand their learning. It sticks better when they know what they're working towards, when they know what the goals of the class are. And so the presenting, the facilitation portion of it should include those goals. The purpose is what we're going to kind of talk about coming up here, but it looks at how students will acquire the skills, the knowledge, the abilities, the aptitudes, and so on that we want them to after our course here. And then Nina mentioned this earlier, one of my favorite words, the relevancy of the learning that we'll be engaging in. How does this apply at the personal level? And in the Mountaineers, we kind of get that for free. People sign up for our activities because they're interested in them. But how does it also apply at course or organizational levels, right? How does what we're doing in our course reflect the goals of the Mountaineers? And I actually, again, going back to that sport climbing course example, I had an opportunity to think about that with regards to the sport climbing course. And I can't remember if I linked it in there, but it was a really fun activity to think about, like, well, here's Mountaineers 2024, the grand plan, the goals that they have. And here's how our course is kind of feeding into those organizational, those big picture goals. So kind of zooming, that's sort of the big theoretical level. We're going to zoom in a little bit and think about the specific activity of facilitating a session with our students. How are we presenting, or how are we facilitating? And again, avoiding this word lecturing, right? Which doesn't have to be a dirty word, but there's so many other ways that we can get at the learning here. Our implementation strategy should fit the type of learning that we want our students to do. And when I say type of learning, I'm using that phrase very purposefully, because broadly, we have these three types of learning. We have motor skills, which are hands-on activities. They're things that you do or that our students are doing. We have cognitive skills, which are those thinking skills, and which we exercise through activities like discussion, reflection, or application. And we have one that people don't typically think of quite as much, what are called affective or emotional skills. And those are the feeling abilities or feeling aptitudes. And those we exercise through activities such as group discussion, the consideration of other viewpoints, and role play. So these are the three, again, based on educational research. This isn't just me throwing stuff out here. These are these three types of learning: the motor skills, the cognitive skills, and the affective or emotional skills. And Gagne, another educational philosopher, has a lot to say about these. So rather than thinking about an example of each of these, what if you were to pick one of those and think about an example of that in the type of activity you most often instruct, or if you're not instructing all that much recently, the activity you most frequently participate in, and maybe in a kind of an instructional or learning context there? What connection can you make with those types of learning and an activity that you instruct or participate in?
One of the motor skill hands-on techniques that's required for alpine scrambling is knowing how to tie into a rope and to build a harness. And one of the techniques that I like to implement is watch one, do one, teach one. And
Nice.
so participants watch one, they do one, and then they teach somebody else how to do one, because in that teaching moment, that's when you find out whether you know it or not. But I always make sure to say, it doesn't matter if you don't get it the first time around, it's okay. Let's do it again. And usually that cycle starts to cement the learning process.
Yeah, such a good cycle. Like you say, we internalize things when we teach a thing, we internalize it in a way that we don't have an opportunity to otherwise. It's such an interesting process. So yeah, absolutely 100% on board with the activity you described there. So a really good example, they're tying a system, right? In this case, a backup harness or an emergency harness, or tying onto a rope. A really good example of motor skills. And I think, you know, the knot tying, the rope manipulation, the climbing skills, all really good motor skills. What if we think about cognitive skills or affective, emotional? The affective or emotional skills can be a stretch. That can be a tough one to think of an example. Any thoughts? I've got a few queued up that I could kind of give you. But Jeff, do you think of one for those?
Yeah, I've got one for that. So I'm a trial lawyer and I've trained some younger trial lawyers. So whenever you're pitching something to a jury, right, you're always thinking about how is a disinterested third party who doesn't really want to be there going to think about this, right? So you're always considering that viewpoint. And especially when you're teaching younger attorneys, right? I think a lot of people come out of law school and they're super fire and brimstone, like, come on, let's litigate. And the average juror is like half asleep and really wishes they could just go back to work. So, you know, when you have a case that is not the end of the, you know, there are cases where you can go in really hot, really intense. If you got like a homicide or something, yeah, go for it. But you know, back when I was a prosecutor, I had this first year prosecutor who was dealing with this. It was certainly criminal. It was not the end of the world. It's something that needed to be prosecuted. It's just like there's no jury in the world who's going to be like, can you believe this? And so when I was teaching her that, I was like, all right, stop what you're doing. Think about how they're viewing this, right? And
Nice.
think about if your tone matches that, right? And she kind of took that, went back to her office, rewrote her whole opening statement based on that feedback, and it was a lot better the second time around.
I love it. I've never had a courtroom example of affective or emotional skills, but that's so perfect. And the specific way in which you're helping her to kind of gain new understanding and a new ability with those skills is by having her consider the viewpoint of the jury. And then there's a great kind of like bringing in of the cognitive skills, the strategies that you and she might know that the jury's half asleep. So how do I hook them? What rhetorical tricks, or not tricks, but rhetorical strategies do I use to bring them back in, to get them to hear my case as I consider how they're feeling in that. So yeah, really, really good example there. Thank you for sharing that. Excellent. I want to talk about some specific strategies, and I have these linked in the resources, so you don't have to take notes on these because you'll have a link to these. You can take these all with you. But some great high leverage strategies, in addition to the ones that Nina and Jeff just mentioned, are questioning, because you can use questions to engage background knowledge, right? Our adult learners and our young learners, in the case of Mac and some of these other students that we work with, bring abilities to our courses, right? So give them the opportunity to share some of that or to make connections with new learning by using clever questioning strategies. And we'll talk a little bit more about what a good question is versus what a not so good question is in just a bit here. Nina described a little bit of this. This is a little bit of a different approach, but there's definitely some overlap. The I do, we do, you do, or the gradual release of responsibility is a really common strategy, especially for some of these foundational motor skills. But for example, the instructor demonstrating how to tie a bowline, then giving the rope to the student and standing next to them as they fumble their way through the first couple of attempts, and then sending them off on their own to tie it on their own, and then maybe start applying that to a situation on a wall or in the wild or whatever, right? The next step to helping that student learn that even better, like Nina brought up, might be to have them teach it to somebody else, or to show or to walk through that as though they were teaching a partner. Role playing is a really good example. This one, Mindy Roberts is the example that I always like to bring up in this one. She has a leadership course or leadership module that she teaches the basic alpine climbing students, and she'll come in with role cards. So there's like the peak bagger is one of the roles, the person who is in over their heads on this climb, the person who forgot their shoes or whatever, or not their shoes, forgot something less obvious than that, right? And then each of them grabs a like status effect card. So like didn't eat enough food and is bonking, or had the wrong kind of food and has a different gastrointestinal issue, or you know, is way too excited for their own good, right? And then has a group of 6, gives them the scenario of there's weather moving in, the peak is just another half hour up, you can see it, as a group, being your roles there, talk about what you're going to do, right? And of course, these are all kind of, they're contrived, but the opportunity to voice some of those things that people are feeling and the opportunity to respond to actual things that you could hear from a team out on a climb or out on the water or out in the forest is good practice in responding to those and thinking about them. And your body starts feeling those emotions regardless of how contrived the situation actually is, right? And so you get an opportunity to practice some of those affective skills through role play. Role play can be a hard one. It can be hard to get buy-in from participants, but when you set it up in a way like that, and they kind of get going with it, even the skeptics kind of really get into it, I find. So I really like that one. Small group discussion, if you prompt them in the right way, especially with very open-ended questions where they have to kind of come to a decision or a conclusion or an idea, rather than something with just a definitive right answer that sort of stops the discussion. They can be really good opportunity for people to consider things from each other's viewpoints. And as an instructor, you can kind of bounce around. You don't want to jump in and dominate those conversations, but you can kind of give little nudges in the right direction if the groups need it. Excuse me. Finally, teach alike, and Nina brought this up a little bit. Students as teachers gives them the opportunity to kind of flex those skills that they bring to our course. And a lot of people are proud to do that because it feels good to know something and to be able to share that. But it also builds this kind of camaraderie and interdependence, and it lightens your burden as facilitator, right? Because you can draw on the existing knowledge and experience of the group. So you don't have to be the only person who knows everything, right? You have people with a range of skills. You can draw on those skills and have them teach and work with each other. Obviously, you have to understand what those skills are, but a lot of our courses last long enough that you get to form kind of a relationship and start to figure those things out among your students. This was something a student actually wrote on one of our classroom sessions, which I appreciated so much because they use so much teacher jargon in there that I was just like, yes, I'm going to use this as an example forever. So instead of just talking at them, they really appreciated that they got to go around and actually touch the backpacks and see the gear and have people explain it and ask questions about it. And they gave feedback reflecting that appreciation. So that was a really successful change from the 1.5 hour lecture to an hour and a half of exploration on different tables. All right, just like last time, I'm going to give you a few minutes to consider the strategies introduced. Choose one of those which feels like a good fit for the materials you're already working with, right? So you've got that learning goal. Which one of these implementation strategies feels like it's going to fit that learning goal well? And then after you've had a chance to think about that, talk with someone in your breakout group that we'll send you into to get some feedback about that strategy. Like, hey, here's what I'm thinking we're going to use, maybe some role play, because with this material, it's important that they understand the hesitation or the fear or the excitement that their students are going to have, and I want to give them a chance to experience that. How do you feel? Is that going to work for me? That kind of thing. Will it work out, or should you consider a different one? Get some feedback, some opinions from your group there. The reminder of the strategies we talked about is there. Obviously, those aren't the only strategies you can use. And once again, those are available on the prompt side down here. So even when I send you into the breakout groups, you can use that link, which if you've lost or closed your browser or something, we'll throw in the chat one more time here. Boom. Okay. Let's go. Was 12 minutes? Raise your hand if that was way too short and you need a couple more minutes for that. Was it way too long? Not just a little too long, but was it way too long? Okay, we're gonna go with about right on that 12 minutes. So we'll do 12 minutes again. Here go the breakout rooms, and I'll be in here if you want to come back to the main room and ask a question. Go. Just let me know if it's a technical issue. Jeff, I assume you just stepped away for a moment. No problem there.
Hey, sorry about that. Been having some Zoom problems.
Oh, no worries. Do you remember which room you were in?
Number one.
Okay. There we go. All right, welcome back. Another challenging task, but maybe not as challenging as developing the learning goals. I think thinking about activities, thinking about how we want to teach the things we're excited to teach can often be the easiest piece of it because it's what we're really excited about, right? So with that in mind, would anyone like to share the strategy that they chose and how it kind of fits well with their learning goal or with what they are hoping for their students?
One thing that I do a lot of is kind of like the I do, we do, you do, and I'm not quite doesn't quite follow that form exactly, but like we're teaching knots or belaying or like clipping quick draws or any of kind of those dexterity, motor skill things. It's like you demonstrate it once
Yeah.
or twice, and you give everybody, you know, a rope to tie the knot with, and you have to do it on, and then you kind of release them, and you walk around and help the people who look like they're struggling, and then you can always kind of do like a give them like a little bit of an evaluation at the end, so say that like, hey, we'll move on when everybody gives me, you know, can present me their piece of line that has, you know, 3 bowlines tied in it or whatever.
Perfect. I love it. And that one even has that performance standard too, so that you know everybody's getting the learning goal in focus and you can move on to the next thing. And then probably at the end of the course, you come back and ask them to do it all. Yeah, definitely. I think the motor skills one is one that resonates with a lot of us where you have your students, you get them to the point where they're showing you they're doing it pretty well, and then give them a lot of opportunity to repeat it until it starts becoming automatic, right? Or as much as possible, sort of ingrained. Terrific. One more?
In group 2, I mean, we had a great conversation around that topic, and you know, our thoughts were that it depended on the type of activity, the skill that was being taught.
Oh yeah.
That, you know, for example, if it's knots and hitches, then it's probably going to be more I do, we do, you do. You know, then we also talked about, it sounds like, you know, at least the 3 individuals that were in group 2, you know, we also do like the teach alike, where returning basic students that haven't graduated yet
Nice.
teach at in an activity to enhance what they learned the previous year to keep it fresh in their minds.
Oh, it's perfect. Yeah.
And also with role playing and stuff like that. So it just depended on the activity.
That's an excellent point. Yeah. The strategy that you use depends very much on that activity or the type of learning that it represents. Very good. All right. We'll push forward. Kind of the final third here, last stretch. Patrick recognized the location. What if we narrow it down to the climb? Have you been out there much? I've spent like a week, 3/4 of a week.
No, I haven't been out there.
Yeah. So in Red Rocks, this is Geronimo, which is the best 5.5, 5.6, something like that I've ever been on. 4 rope stretching pitches of just this gorgeous juggy patina, and you feel like a rock star all the way up. I do have a piece of protection a lot closer to my foot in this picture. The last one is not 30 feet down, but probably don't even need that. It was so cruiser and just so much fun. And then you get to do a bunch of double rope rappels, which is always fun. So that was an absolutely gorgeous climb. Right across from that big classic, whose name I can't remember. So you get to watch the elite guys go up that big classic tower all day, the like 16 pitch, whatever. So Red Rocks, if you're a climber, oh my gosh, get over there. It's so gorgeous. All right, last section. Evaluating, which we also know as testing or assessing or quizzing or et cetera, et cetera. Different disciplines, I'm learning in my new position with the OSPI, use the word assessment differently. We're talking basically here about making sure our students have acquired the skills, the aptitudes, the competencies that we want them to by the end of our course. So once again, our turn and talk, we're not going to go into breakout rooms for this. This would be a great opportunity to point you at your tables, to talk with your elbow partner a little bit. Again, that activating the prior knowledge to make connections between experience and content. Can you think of any recent assessments that you were required to perform with the Mountaineers or for another group? Or another fun question here, do any past assessments stand out in memory as particularly heinous or particularly clever, either because they were totally mismatched with the skills that you were being asked to demonstrate, or because they were a really good way to ask you to demonstrate those skills. Any thoughts?
I mean, the assessments that we do in scrambling is just probably the biggest one is all the self-arrest assessments, and it's clear as day whether people can do it or not.
Those can be an assessment that are both heinous, but also really, really appropriate to the learning that you're hoping they'll get out of the course, right? Because it's such a necessary skill, those self-arrest skills. So that's a really good one, yeah. One for me is being asked to do a paper test or quiz or something for something that's clearly a motor skill, or being asked to write something down that I could much better show off by going through a map and talking you through this process, or even writing a little narrative about my thought process or something like that. So people love going to their multiple choice questions, their true false questions, and sometimes those are appropriate. Sometimes we need to just bang through a whole bunch of them at once, but really more frequently, there are much better ways to get at what our students are learning on that assessment portion. So let's think about some of those. Just like with the implementation, the way that we're assessing should fit the type of learning, right? So for the self-arrest skills that we just talked about, you wouldn't ask them to write how they're going to self-arrest. You go out and you have them slide headfirst down the steep snowbank, okay? And that is because motor skills you want to check with hands-on activities, tests, quizzes, and checkpoints of those motor skills, not a paper test, right? But just like Blake was talking about, you have the student demonstrate, show me in your little length of rope, show me that you've tied that knot successfully 3 times in a row, we'll move forward, that kind of thing. So if you're assessing that they've acquired a motor skill, the demonstration of that competency should ask them to demonstrate that skill. Cognitive skills, those skills that you remember are the kind of thinking skills, might be best assessed with a written or a computer-based test and quiz. But even with those, we have to be kind of thoughtful, because there are different ways to ask a question that elicit different kinds of thinking and get at different kinds of knowledge, right? Multiple choice questions are particularly egregious about giving them the answer without having them really kind of need to think about it, because it's challenging to write a good multiple choice question. And a lot of times a different question type will do better. Affective skills can be pretty hard to assess, but if we have sufficient time and resources, dialogue, narrative, discussion are all appropriate ways to assess those skills. A test, an assessment doesn't necessarily have to be someone sitting down at a desk and taking a test. It can be a discussion, right? It can be the facilitator taking some notes about whether they're feeling comfortable with how the person is responding to those questions and whether it feels like they're acquiring those affective skills that we're hoping for. I'm going to skip that. There are 2 places to assess your students. And this, in teaching, the kind of jargony term for it is formative assessment, is this ongoing assessment that we do throughout the instruction to make sure that we're not going to get to the end of it and find out, whoops, they haven't been with us the whole time, right? So this ongoing assessment or formative assessment is one really important way to assess our students. Some concrete strategies. The Fist of 5 is a really good, quick, informal one. Can be great for outdoor settings or indoor, but you do an anchor on a scale of I am totally not following, I don't understand at all, to I could teach this to someone else. Just show me on your hands where you are right now. And then you can have them do it either kind of privately, where they don't have to show in front of other people, like, oh, I'm feeling kind of sketchy about this. Or you could have them all just show it up in the air. If you see a bunch of 0, 1s, 2s, you might have to go back and cover something again. If you see a bunch of 4s and 5s going up, you know you're good to move forward. So real quick, good formative assessment strategy. The question parking lot we're all used to. I'm not going to talk about that one. Open-ended questions. I alluded to this earlier. A question with a definitive yes or no response doesn't give a person a chance to give you their actual answer. All it does is elicit what they know you want to hear, right? Are you following me? Yes. It's just our reaction, right? It's what we do immediately. Rather than that closed question, open it up. What questions do you have about that process? What do you still want to know about placing protection in a crack of that shape? What are you still curious about? Where are you struggling with the materials we've just covered? Give them a chance to think about it and respond rather than just a yes, no. Quiz a partner. This is kind of in that mode of teach alike, where you have them ask each other some questions relevant to the content. That can take a little bit of setup, but it can also be a great way to go, especially if you have a lot of very knowledgeable students in your group. And one of my favorites for the start and the end, to kind of put a cap on it, is to start the beginning of a unit of instruction with the K, the what you already know and what you want to know. And I'll have people write these on sticky notes. The no poster goes over here. Here are the things I already know about this topic. The things I'm really curious that I want to know about this topic go on this other poster. And then you have to remember to come back around at the end of the unit of instruction, whether it's a class session or a whole course, and you have them write some things about what they've learned about that. And that gives them an opportunity to kind of reflect a little bit. It sort of sets the learning. It sets up some schema in their brain where they can kind of start to solidify some of this stuff. So the KWL is a lot of fun too. And if you Google that, that's a very common K-12 strategy. You find a lot of teachers out there doing that one in a lot of different ways. Same with all of these. Those are the ongoing assessment strategies, right? The other obvious place that we need to assess our students is at the end of a unit of instruction. When our course or our lesson is wrapping up and we want to make sure that they have acquired those things we set out in our learning goals, we turn to our what's called summative or end of instruction assessment strategies. Written test is something we're all familiar with. These can be facilitated really easily with some online tools. Google Forms has some free and easy pieces that can make some fairly robust quizzes. They've got some good question types on there. And boy, if your program runs through a lot of students and you still do paper tests, do yourself a favor and move over to an online platform. The bonus too is that you can look at past years' responses and kind of you have archival information there too. Oh, the huge downside there obviously is that there are a lot of skills such as motor skills, affective skills that are really hard to get at with a paper test. Scenario-based are some of my favorite. Again, we go back to what Turner mentioned with the self-arrest. That's a scenario-based assessment. And that's what we do, I think, in a lot of our Mountaineers activities. We've worked on all the components of a crevice rescue system over the last 2 months. Now is your chance in under 15 minutes, set up a crevice rescue on your rope team of 3 as climber A, climber B, or climber C, and show me that you can do it, right? So it's this scenario-based assessment. One that I've often thought of in kind of like orienteering courses or navigation courses, even in basic alpine climbing courses, I've set these up kind of, and they've been pretty fun. But giving students an opportunity to plan a trip, right, using all the skills that they've acquired. So this creative or this project-based sort of plan where you're assessing not all of the skills, maybe, especially because the motor skills can be kind of tricky to get in this one, but it's a much more creative way to find out where those cognitive and affective skills have grown among your students. So giving them an opportunity to assemble a package of information that makes sense for your content area can be, you find sometimes as an instructor too, that it can be fun to set these up and to think about like, what would it look like if I had them actually plan out something as though they weren't in a course, but they were friends of mine and we were planning this trip, and then kind of thinking about the checkpoints in that process and what that would look like. It can be a lot of fun to design some of these clever assessments. All right, so our final piece, I think I'm going to take a little bit less time here on this one because we're running pretty close to our 2-hour mark. You can see how it was tough to fit this in 90 minutes. I would like you to consider these strategies to choose one which feels like it's a good fit to allow you to assess an upcoming learning goal with your students, and then to either talk with your breakout group to get some feedback about that, or when you come back here to share that with us, of course. And then again, I have both the reference here on the slide, and I think I've got this included in the yeah, there they are on that Google Doc that I linked you to. So we've got our ongoing strategies and we've got our summative strategies there. So let's shorten this one up quite a bit. We're just going to go 6 minutes. Will take us to a nice 7:50 there, and then we'll pull you back and we'll move towards finishing here. So we'll get my options 6 minutes to automate it, and rooms are open. See you in a few minutes. Outstanding. Thank you all so much for hanging in all evening. Really appreciate it. So any thoughts about some assessment styles that might fit for the materials you've been thinking about this evening?
I think in our group, we pretty much came to the conclusion that the best assessment for a lot of our mountaineering courses is by actually physically showing and doing. And it didn't seem as though that there were actually very many assessments that were relevant with writing anything down particularly.
Nice.
It's much more hands-on and showing the skills, and that definitely seems to be relevant for a lot of our courses. Maybe not for like avalanche awareness and stuff like that, but in our group we're climbers and scramblers, and yeah, for sure. For navigation, writing stuff down seems absolutely relevant. And in navigation, we do a lot of the small group scenario-based discussion work,
Nice.
which becomes relevant with certain scenarios and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, love it. Thoughtful consideration of different circumstances there and the different modes, but definitely agree that a lot of what we do is physical activity, and the best way to make sure they're doing it well is to observe them doing it well.
Ed shared one that I thought was really interesting. The Kitsap Basic Alpine class has people take sort of a little online pretest before they come to some of the classes or activities. Because a lot of times, you know, someone will say, you're supposed to read page XYZ of Freedom of the Hills. Did I do that when I was in basic? No, I didn't. But it sounds like the Kitsap Basic Alpine class gets people to do a little bit more of that pre-reading, so they come into the class with a little bit more knowledge and skill to start from, because they have to do that like short little online assessment. So I thought that was a really good use of like a written or multiple choice test.
Outstanding. Yeah, really good example there. Thanks for sharing. Terrific. Well, with that, then we'll click through to just some thoughts here. You don't have to answer these if you want to, that would be awesome. But what big ideas will you be taking home with you? What applications will you be making in the work that you do with the Mountaineers? And what lingering questions you have? So again, my whole idea is that we're not just thinking about these ideas, we're putting them to work in the materials that either you brought with you or you borrowed, or that you're thinking about prospectively for some of the units of instruction that you've got coming up. So hopefully some nuggets, and again, learning goals, if nothing else, you'll be able to take with you to your next instructor. And finally, feel free to email me, hopsuki@gmail.com. I love supporting Mountaineers activities and would love to brainstorm and talk with you about what you're planning and what you're thinking about coming up. I'm a volunteer with the Mountaineers, and I like helping other volunteers with the Mountaineers. It's not a consultancy or anything like that. Just drop me a line and let's chat about what you're working on. I'd love to talk about it. And here are some great books. Make It Stick on the left side there is probably the most broadly applicable one that has some really good strategies for successful learning and just meticulously research-based there. Universal Design for Learning, a little more jargony, K-12, college kind of stuff, but some really fascinating principles in there. And then a couple of great podcasts, which are also sort of formal academic work, not really outdoor focused, but a lot of overlap between what they talk about and what we do in our classrooms. Thank you all so much. 5 minutes early. I'm going to hang out for a bit if anybody's got any questions or wants to talk about anything. But otherwise, thank you once again for coming. And yeah, hope to see you in the mountains.
Thank you very much, Benjamin.
Thanks,
My
Ben.
pleasure.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Yeah, really good, thought-provoking stuff, and poking us all to be better instructors, leaders, and whatever, and stirring up the pot of our instructorship. Thank you.
Thanks for mentioning it, Nina. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Take care.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for coming, Bill.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much, Ben, for the great session.
Thanks, Blake. Cheers.